The following is a presentation of the Matt Talk Podcast Network.
You've always got time for Short Time.
Hey, it's Mario Lopez.
David Taylor.
Brent Metcalf. Johnny Hendricks. Tony Ramos. Bubba J.
Mike Golick.
Matthew Modine.
The one and only Chael Sonnen, and you are listening to the one and only Short Time Wrestling Podcast by the often imitated and never duplicated Jason Bryant.
Episode 279 of the Short Time Wrestling Podcast. My name is Jason Bryant. Today, I'm actually going to be ripping off something. Yeah, I'm going to be ripping off an idea that Ben Askren and Tommy Rollins came up with on their show, the T-Row and Funky Show. And if you need to know how to listen to that particular podcast, you can go to matttalkonline.com/directory. It'll give you a list of every wrestling podcast that you can think of. It's also over on Flow Wrestling and on iTunes and all sorts of things. But with me today, Kyle Klingman from the National Wrestling Hall of Fame, Dan Gable Museum. He's going to try to make sense of my list, because when I say I'm going to copy an idea, I mean, I'm going to come up with my own top 10 list. And I did some research on this, and it's like, okay, there's not a whole lot of difference, but there's a couple things that, you know, those two guys are Division I national champions multiple times. They've got a different aspect. And then Kyle is one of our sports resident great historians, and I'm a stats guy, so we're trying to make sense of this. So, Kyle, let me tell you, first of all, do you have a list of your own top 10s, or is it just kind of like a 1 and then a 1A for everybody else in the sport of wrestling?
I have a list in my head of what I would consider probably the top 5, but that includes international wrestling and a combination of international and college. So I have this elite of the elite group that doesn't budge much, and actually Jordan Burroughs is in that group despite not placing at the Olympic Games. He's still in that top tier group. I actually have Jordan Burroughs ahead of Bruce Baumgartner, even internationally, because of what he did in such a short period of time and the domination he had. So we could get into that, but I do have a lot of thoughts on the collegiate side on who should be on the list and why, and different eras, and should it be about domination. And I'm sure you'll get into that there was the 3-year varsity era that Dan Gable was a part of, and how does that factor in. So lots of things to think about. Dan Hodge was 46-0. To current day wrestlers, they wrestle 46 matches in a season. So how do you compare that? How do you compare a guy at the 1928 tournament that had a 5-man bracket to the 33-man brackets today? So really some things you have to take into consideration when you make such a massive undertaking.
Yeah, and that's the one thing that I know that Ben and Tommy mentioned on their show quite a bit, is like they didn't go really that far back. I mean, there's some old timers, as we would say, for our age demographic, on what we would consider an old timer. But it's also, this is just the concept of college wrestling. So let's use an example like Utaki, for example, won an Olympic medal when he was in college. That's not going to be considered. It's just the collegiate style of wrestling. So in that era. So, and you also bring this up. I want to throw some numbers out before we get started. So I went through and dug up what I could, and I've got a pretty good backlog of, and you know, before Jay Hammond passed, he gave me a copy of his database, and since then I've added so many different things to it that I've got different sorts and things of my own, and I've got ways that I'm sorting that data. But here's what I've got, and this probably might need an accounting firm to verify some of the numbers here. But from what my records indicate, is we have 131 4-time NCAA Division I All-Americans. And now this is just a Division I list, folks. So before we throw out, Joey Davis, Division II, Marcus Levesser, Division III, this is just Division I. And so we've got 131 All-Americans. Freshmen became eligible in 1971, and between 1951 and 1970, freshmen were ineligible. There was also a time way back in the day, I think they were also ineligible, but there was also a gap post-World War II. I believe they were eligible and then were not, and you can probably fill in the gaps there. Looking at things, we had 43 3-time champions, 136 2-time champions, 16 4-time finalists. And during the 3-year era, the best I can figure out, we had 45 3-time finalists and 22 3-time champs. So we've got a lot of stuff to pour over just to try to get 10.
Those are great stats, though. I really enjoyed hearing that. I think the only one that I disagree with was the when the freshmen could compete, because Larry Owings competed at the 1969 NCAA tournament as a freshman and then won it as a sophomore. So I'm not quite sure how that all plays out. But
all right. Well, it's one of those things where we had the first four-time All-American from that era began in 1970. So that's where I came up with the 1970 number. So again, if it's something, one number, I don't think is not going to affect the outcome here. So
no, it won't. It won't.
When I look at the list and I start breaking these things down, and you can't, obviously people are going to start number one. You're going to probably, most every list is probably going to have Cale Sanderson on it. Number one, 159-0, 4-time national champion, 61 falls. You're not, I don't think any college wrestling list about great wrestlers of all time can't have Cale number one. I might be going in reverse kind of weird order here, but I don't know. Is that pretty much a good place to say that we're most lists are going to have Cale number one?
I don't know how you couldn't go with Cale number one, just given the circumstances of it's the most unique era in that you have 32-man brackets, undefeated, 4-time national champion, 4-time Big 12 champion, 3-time outstanding wrestler. Actually, 4-time outstanding wrestler. Stephen Neal didn't win it that year, so 4-time OW. I think he's the clear-cut favorite. I don't know who you could go with other than him.
Yeah, so that's where I think Tommy and Ben were in agreement there. And I'm actually going to reference some of their lists because, again, this was their concept, and I'm just kind of chiming in on what I think here. So they both had Cale number one. Now this is where we start getting into the numbers. So there's a list, I think, of – I didn't go through every single one of these athletes, but I got a list about 20 deep that I kind of worked on the last bit, but here's some of the names that aren't included. Here are some of the 3-time champions that sorry, you missed, or 4-time, here, let's start with just the 4-time finalists. There's only been 16 of those, 4 times. And of those, you've got 4-time champions. Then you've got how many 3-time champions out of the 4-time finalist groups? Just 4. Lincoln McElravy, Ed Bannock, Lee Kemp, and Dick Hutton. You got to go back to the 50s with Dick Hutton, who was the first 3-time NCAA heavyweight champion. And then you got guys, Jimmy Jackson, Carlton Hasselrick following him. So of the 4-time finalists, there were only 3 of them, not counting the 4-timers. There were 4 of them, McElravy, Bannock, Kemp, and Hutton, that won 3 titles. Then you look, and then you've got 2-time champions, David Taylor, Jake Varner, Ben Askren, Steve Mocco, Mark Branch, Daryl Burley, Pat Milkovich. And then of those, you have 1 4-time finalist that won 1 title. I'll give you a gold star if you can tell me who it is.
1 4-time finalist with 1 title is Dwayne Goldman.
Dwayne Goldman is correct. 2-2-2-1. So that's a lot to deal with. That's 16 4-time finalists right there. The list can only be 10 deep. So right now, we're already going to eliminate some things. Other names that were multiple-time All-Americans that I'm looking at, or multiple-time champs that are like, this is going to make this list incredibly tough. Alex Dieringer recently, goes 3-1-1-1. 3-time champ there. Ed Ruth did the same thing, 3-time champ, 3rd. Jake Rochold, 3-time champ, 1-time 3rd. Stephen Abbas, 4th, 3 times champion. Eric Guerrero, a 5th and 3-time champion. Joe Williams, 7th and 3 times. Tom Brands, 4th and 3 times. Barry Davis, 7th and 3 times. Jimmy Zaleska, 5th and these are names that, how do you do this, Kyle? How do you do this?
You have a lot of fun with it and hope that it's not about creating a definitive list, but it's about expanding the conversation and educating people so that they explore it themselves, so they learn more about the sport.
Is it fair, do you think, when putting things like this, that you rank 1 to 10, or should you just say, here's the best, or is like, it's Cale and then here's the next 9?
I think that you have to try. I think it's a cop-out if you just try to say, hey, it's 1, and then you just put the rest into a basket and see where they come out. I think that's the whole fun of it, is to rank them and see where you'd put someone, and then disagree with someone and say, I'd put this person higher. I think we'll have some disagreements, as you will with Tommy Rowlands and Ben Askren, but these are never definitive, and that's what makes it a ton of fun, because you really can't compare eras because of rules and things that happen along the way, but it doesn't stop us from trying.
All right, so we've already got the 1 defined, so let's go backwards now to 10. And I need a tiebreaker here. I need help on 10, because my number 10 spot is a toss-up. I don't know who to pick here, because we've got Stephen Abbas of Fresno State and Lee Kemp of Wisconsin. So we've got Abbas, who was 144-4, 3-time champion. And then we go Lee Kemp, who, let's see, according to his record, 143, 6-1, second, and then 3 titles. So we're in different eras. We got guys that had good international careers after that. One point that Ben and Tommy were making about Kemp is how he started as a high school sophomore. And then, here we go 4 years later, he's wrestling for an NCAA title against Chuck Yeagles. So, I'm leaning Abbas mainly because he's in my age demographic, but I mean, I feel like it's disrespecting Kemp to at least not give him, a fair shot here.
I don't think there's any question that Kemp is the guy there. I'll throw out that at the 1976 Northern Open, although Dan Gable was very injured, Kemp won a match over Gable 7-6 in the Northern Open finals. I think that factors in a little bit, and I know you don't put world credentials in it, but the year after he won his NCAA title in 78, his senior year, he won a world championship. So he's on that caliber. And then you put Stephen Abbas in that same mix. 2003, he tried out for the world team, made the world team. It was supposed to, that was 2001. It was supposed to be in the United States. He went and did not place. So there's just a few factors that put Lee Kemp higher for me. He got beat by Eric Juergens twice at the NCAA tournament his freshman year in 1998. So I'm going with Lee Kemp, but this is your list, and I'm just chiming in on who I would think.
Okay, so here's the and this is where Ben and Tommy actually they went back through and looked at the freshman year. There's certain reasons guys didn't make their list is because the number of losses their freshman year. I think Mark Schultz was an example there, but I'm looking at it and I'm looking. Okay, Abbas had all of his losses. Let's see, we had those 2 losses to Juergens, and then he bumped up a weight to wrestle Eric Guerrero in a dual meet and lost, and that was his last college loss. Whereas Lee Kemp had a loss as a junior and 5 as a freshman. So, granted, Lee Kemp didn't have the red shirt year there. So, I mean, you were talking advantage push here for number 10, in my opinion. I mean, I'm leaning Abbas because I saw him wrestle, but I'm also leaning Kemp because, 2-1-1-1 just doesn't happen. Yeah,
it doesn't.
It
does not happen.
So,
and I don't know about that. The one you're talking about, the loss. I'd like to know who that was against, just so I can make sure that it wasn't post-collegiate. I think Kelly Ward tied him once. So these are according to Jay Hammond's database, which he did go back and scrub unofficial losses, and we'll actually talk about that later when we get to one of the guys that's really high on my list. But according to Jay. The late Jay Hammonds, 33-5 as a freshman, 39-0 as a sophomore, 40-1 as a junior, 31-0-1 as a senior. Okay. So that would have been the Kelly Ward. So
it could be.
I would just need to know who he got beat by. And if it was a post-collegiate wrestler, which sometimes they did put on records back then, I would have to analyze it different. Regardless, I would go with Lee Kemp either way. That's who I'm picking. But in that, I would probably actually put him a little bit higher. He wasn't a pinner. He didn't dominate. Dave Schultz's famous quote was, he's going to blow this guy out 2-1, 3-2 easy, which was the way he wrestled. And so I just think Lee Kemp has a very high spot for me on that list that I talked about earlier where I said there's 5 guys that I have in a special spot. Lee Kemp is one of those 5, so he's always going to get the nod in my book.
No, yeah, it's just one of those things. It's like, because that means according to my list, one of these guys isn't on it, and that's a hard pill for me to swallow.
You have to pick, JB. You have to pick who you want. So I think you're on the clock.
I might have to. For me not to pick Abbas is like heresy, but for me not to pick Kemp is heresy as well. It's like, you know what? Hold on, I got a coin here. I got one from Brazil. Or do I? No, you know what? I don't. No. Okay, Matt talk pin. Heads or tails? Heads, it's Abbas. Tails is Kemp. All right, we're tossing it. It is heads. I'm not happy with that. I'm just going to leave that one here. We'll leave that for the fans to decide. So
okay.
I'm going to table that for another matter. So, number 9 on my list, Lincoln McElravy. Kind of hard to argue this one. 96-3, didn't have the total, didn't have the huge matches. Didn't have, the 130, 140 wins like a lot of guys do. But official record 96-3. That gives him a 96.97 win percentage. The 2 losses as a freshman, then of course the 1 loss, his junior year going for history, that stopped him. It was, Steve Perry and Eddie match. It's like, okay, you look at losses towards the end of the career, but I mean, McElravy, when I think Iowa wrestler, a lot of people will immediately think the Brands brothers or, guys like that. I automatically gravitate to Lincoln McElravy.
Huh.
Just because, he just looks, the guy, I've only met him once ever. And it was last summer at the Hall of Fame. I just was saying, oh, hey, nice to meet you. And he just still looked like he would it's that stare. He's just like, I'm going to tech you. It's just something about Lincoln. Then, he was ending his career as I was getting involved in wrestling. So it was one of those guys that I didn't really actively see compete until they were on the international stage. And it was like, man, it's just the legend of this guy to me, just kind of puts him in there, and then his stats just kind of tend to back it up.
And keep in mind that his senior year, he was injured, really was out the last half of the season, so I don't think you ever saw the best of Lincoln come his senior year. And, of course, he got pulled out of redshirt as a true freshman in 1993. He was not slated to wrestle, and that was a big part of the University of Iowa winning the Big Tens that year in the NCAA tournament. So Lincoln McElravy is certainly one of the all-time greats.
Yeah, so any argument of having him in the top 10? I don't think there is one.
I know he's one of the greats, man. You look at the credentials, and I remember that so well. When he got beat, it was a huge upset. But you're a 4-time finalist. He had a unique style, had that boot scoot, just did some things that aren't being done even today. And so stylistically, and just what he did for the sport, I don't maybe look just at credentials a lot of times. I think about what someone did to elevate the sport. So I think Lincoln McElravy certainly deserves to be in the top 10.
All right, number 8, I'm going Logan Stieber here. 4-time champ.
Logan Stieber.
We've got 4 of them. So it's like I don't really have a criteria, but all 4 of these 4-timers, in my opinion, have to be in the list because it's such a small fraternity of athletes.
Yeah, if I was to leave one off, it would be Logan Stieber. And clearly he's the last of your 4-timers if you're putting him at number 8. I just think it's too early to tell where his legacy is with all of this. Had 2 controversial matches, one against Tony Ramos and one against Jordan Oliver, which I don't want to hold against him, but I really did think he lost that Oliver match, so that would put him as a 3-timer. But needless to say, he's a 4-timer, and that's what history says, so you still can't argue that there should be credentials for a 4-timer being in your top 10 list. I just wouldn't put him in my top 10.
See, I like that you gave me the counterpoint there because this is one I kind of struggled with. Again, it shouldn't necessarily be automatic, even though I just said it should be automatic. But I look at it, and he also had the benefit. He had that injury his freshman year. At 125 where he was 5-3 and then he got a medical. So that one basically he preserved that year of eligibility. That puts him record wise 124-6, which gives him the tied with the most amount of losses on this list with Kemp. Kemp had 6 and a tie, and it also has him the lowest winning percentage. Barely, actually by 0.07. He's a little higher than another guy on this list that also had 4 titles. So Stieber's probably the one that I fought over the most, with the exception of, Abbas or I think it's just like, okay, you can't not have a 4-timer in there. So this is where, again, the flaw in my methodology might be clear, but a 4-time champ, that's the one argument you've got to say, dude, 4-time champ, end of discussion, mic drop. It's kind of hard to argue.
It really is, and so it is hard to argue that. But if you do want to make an argument, you could say, hey, there were some 3-timers in the 3-time NCAA champion era that went 3 for 3. That's all they could do. That was their only option. You had to win 3. So I don't know if you're going to have Utaki on that list. I have no idea, but that's the same with him. He went 3 for 3 undefeated. So I think the 4-time national champ is in a category that only 4 people understand what that takes. And Logan Stieber is a tremendous wrestler. I would never diminish his ability as a wrestler, but if you're just talking about personal options and where you would put someone on a list, Logan Stieber would not be on mine yet. I mean, I would judge it a little bit different. I think he's too close to the end of his career to really put in perspective where he is. But he would not be on my top 10 list.
So that's one thing. See, because remember, Kyle here is not doing his own list. He is my yang, so to speak. He's the one to balance out my thoughts to make sure I'm not crazy or I'm not screwing things up. So, like I said, I can definitely see your point here. I've got him on here, mainly because again, there's only four timers ever. Granted, now there are several three timers. I want to go through and put a point system together and maybe revisit this. But anyway, moving to number 7, Pat Smith. Here's why: 4-timer, first guy to do it. So I think there's something to do with the precedent. As I mentioned earlier, he's actually his win percentage is actually the least highest on this list. So as I said, I thought I had Stever's 95.38. And Pat Smith is 95.31. So we're looking at 121-5-2. And most of all those 5 of those losses, I'm pretty sure came his freshman year. So, and doing something nobody had ever done before. I think there's something that has that precedent that puts him on this list. I know that Ben actually had him number 10, and Tommy Rollins did not have him in his top 10.
Oh, okay.
So thoughts on Pat Smith here?
I like the pick. I think everything you said is really sound logic, because here's a guy that did something that had never been done before. And let's be honest, there was a ton of pressure on him to win that 4th title in 94. There was some sanctions against Oklahoma State in 93. He took a redshirt year that year, stayed with the program. He could have transferred to Arizona State and finished out his career at Arizona State with his brother Leroy, decided to stick with it. Won it as a true freshman. First match, he comes out and gets pinned against Dan Russell, but is able to turn that around and win the NCAA tournament over Schleicher of Navy, and then actually beat Russell in the semifinals of the NCAA tournament that year. So I'm a big Pat Smith fan, so that might blind me a little bit. So anyone that's going to put Pat Smith on the top 10 list, I'm all for it. But he deserves it because he had to be very mentally tough to overcome that and make history. So I completely agree with your pick.
Yeah, and of course there's the Smith name that goes along with it as well.
Yeah, that helps.
Little pressure there, little added pressure.
But he made a name for himself. He won 4 NCAA championships and is the first person to do it. That's impressive on its own standing. That alone says a lot, because no one had done it to that point. There was that window in the 1940s where Dick Hutton could have done it, Bill Nelson could have done it, Joe Scarpello, but they didn't do it. They had that short window and they didn't get it done. Pat Smith was the guy.
All right, now we go to number 6, and this is where it starts getting dicey, because boom, back to back 4-time national champions. And if you figure that out, we've already put out who's number 1. So you got to, by process of elimination, you can figure out Kyle Dake. Dake on this list because, again, 4-timer, first guy to do it at 4 different weight classes. Heck, he was the first guy to do it at 3 different weight classes. And, you know, here's one thing that people don't look at. And they talk about his dominance. It's like, oh, well, he wasn't as dominant. Well, Dake finished his last 2 years undefeated, 72-0 in those last 2 years. 30 of those matches ended by fall. So he only had 14 falls the previous 2 years total. Then he went on a run. He started pinning more people. I think it was like, hey, I'm sick and tired of you people telling me that I'm not dominant enough. And he pinned 30 of his last 72 opponents. So Dake had the dominance, 137-4. Last loss was to Kevin LaValle at the EIWA championships as a sophomore at 149. So it's just, Dake did something nobody else has done. And that, too, also has historical significance on this list, just like Pat Smith.
And so he's your number 6?
He's my number 6.
Okay. Yeah, I thought you were going to put him a little bit higher. What he did is off the chart special. I don't think it will ever be done again. I think it's the most unbreakable record in college wrestling. I think there's a better chance of someone going undefeated and winning 4 national championships. I think that could happen before someone wins 4 NCAA titles at 4 different weights. So I actually put his accomplishment and how he did it is the greatest college wrestling accomplishment in our sport.
Yeah, that's an argument in and to itself. If you want to start arguing the 4-timers and what they have done, but I just also fresh in the minds. I saw all 4 of them. I was there. I was there for one of his losses. I saw his last loss. I was at the IWAs that year, so it was kind of interesting. Now we move to the top 5. Now number 5.
Wow, we're here.
Yeah, number 5 is this is a guy who was not on either of Ben and Tommy's lists, and this is a guy that's often overlooked. He was the most notable snub on the 75th anniversary team. And this is also one that I am extremely personally biased for. This is somebody who has actually had a great impact in my career and my life in the sport of wrestling. So number 5, 3-time NCAA champion from Lock Haven, Gray Simons.
Yeah, I like your pick there. I think that's a good historical pick that a lot of people would forget. And I think in addition to that, he was a 4-time NAIA champion. So I think he won 7 national championships. So I have to applaud you for putting him on that list, because I think a lot of people would forget about him. He was a marvelous wrestler, fantastic credentials, and I would never pick against Gray Simons being on a top 10 list.
And here's what I have, and I didn't want to lead with the 7-time thing, because back in that era, the dual affiliation, Lock Haven was dual affiliated with the NAIA and the NCAA. So at the time, you could wrestle with under 850 students in the school. Freshmen were eligible to compete, at least, so he could wrestle in the NAIA national championships, but of course not NCAA championship eligible. And this is before there was a true Division I. This was the college and university division. So 89-1 career record. And this is what I wanted to alluded to earlier. When I was talking with Jay Hammond before he passed, we were talking about Gray's record. And initially he was 89-2. Well, upon further research, the 2 losses he took his freshman year, one was to the returning NCAA champion up a weight, because he was wrestling at 115, and not every school wrestled 115 out east. It was one of those like optional weights, so you can probably fill in a little bit more about the history of 115. So he bumped up a weight class and lost to, I believe, a national champ from Pitt. I'm not sure exactly who that was, in a dual meet. Well, the other loss was to a past NCAA champion, post-collegiate from, I believe it was Syracuse. That match unofficially was wiped from his career record, because it was to a post-collegiate, who was also an NCAA champion. So the only 2 losses, and they came his freshman year. So this is why I'm pitching the Gray Simons flag right now. One, he was the coach at Old Dominion when I was a student there. So I got to know Gray Simons and got to know about Gray because of my personal interaction, my personal relationship with him. And I would sit in his office for hours, and he would tell me about Doug Blueball. He would tell me about all these greats that he wrestled with. He'd tell me about the battles with Dick Wilson, who just went into the Hall of Fame posthumously last year. I mean, you're talking about, he taught me so much about the wrestling world when I was just getting into it. So, and then I realized that this guy was one of the greatest of all time, and he doesn't even seem like it. Like, he's not like like walking around chest all out. I mean, the guy likes to ride his bike, and I think he was still teaching adjunct classes at Old Dominion, a couple years ago. So Gray gets forgotten because his last title came in 1962, and it's one of those things like, 7 titles. He was an OW 6 times, by the way. And the one loss his freshman year. And interestingly enough, he was only a 1-time high school state champion. And that was his sophomore year at Granby High School, wrestled for Billy Martin. So Gray Simons is my number 5, because 89-1, his win percentage is 98.89%, 30 falls. So he also was one of the guys that had a lot of matches in that era. So it wasn't like he's in the 60s with a 57-0 record. He's 89-1, and that one loss was a freshman. So he was a 3-for-3er in that era. So he's my number 5. All
right, I like the pick. I probably flip-flop with Dake and Simons, but this is your list, and I think that's a great pick. So I'm happy you put him on that list.
All right, number 4. This is where we get really dicey, because we've got 2, 3, and 4 left, and I really struggled over the placement here, because as we said, we've already said Kale's 1. We don't even really need to discuss that. So 4, just by statistics alone, statistically, this guy was not undefeated, and he only won 2 national titles, which means if his name was anything else, he probably wouldn't be on the list. Dan Gable, number 4. Is that sacrilege to say Gable's number 4?
It depends on who you put at 2 and 3. Of course, I'm a huge fan of Gable, and I think he should probably be in that number 2 spot, just for a variety of reasons. I don't necessarily just look at titles, but I look at what he did within that. Really had a dominant career, 25 pins in a row at one point, and was able to do some things special. So you look at domination, even that senior year where he placed second, I think he pinned 30 out of 32 or something ridiculous like that. Pinned his way through the NCAA tournament in 1969. I don't think anyone on your list, in fact, I know they haven't unless you have Dan Hodge coming up, has pinned their way through the NCAA tournament. So he has some things on the list that nobody else has. Yes, he lost his last match in college, but he also won 117 in a row if you count that true freshman. The Midlands title in 1966, where he's a true freshman. He was a senior in high school at 112 pounds. 8 months later, he wins the Midlands at 130 and beats a Olympic silver medalist in Don Beam and a 28-year-old NCAA champion, Misaki Hata. So I think you can really justify why Gable should be at number 4, but for what he did for the sport, how he elevated it, he took it out of obscurity, and a lot of the things that we get to enjoy today are because of Dan Gable's legacy. So I'd put him at 2, but I think 4 is certainly warranted.
Yeah, and here's where I struggle with it, because what he's meant to the sport, you look at it and be like, oh, come on. Well, what he's meant to the sport as a coach, as an Olympian, as a world champion, as an Olympic champion, as a basically an inspirational type of leader figure, somebody that's a figurehead that can speak and basically be a ambassador. That's the word I'm looking for. An ambassador to the sport of wrestling. There's no question. He's number 1 on this list. But again, here's the thing, and I have to take as much as I put all the personal stuff on Gray Simons in, I'm going to take the personal stuff out of it with Coach Gable for a moment. He's the only guy on this list that lost his last match. He's one of, he's the only guy on this list that only had 2 NCAA titles. So just statistically, that's like one of those things. It's just like, man, that really kind of sucks, because I initially, when I put,
those are great points, Jason, and I agree. I'm probably inserted into that scenario a little bit too much, but certainly anything.
I put him at number 2 first. When I first wrote down the list, I put him at number 2, and then I looked at him and go, okay, he's the only 2-time guy on this list. He's the only 2-timer that merited consideration, and then he's the only guy on the list that lost his last college match. I mean, Johnny Thompson. If Johnny Thompson finishes his career 1-1-1 is last. I mean, he's on this list somewhere. It's something like, TJ Williams doesn't make the cut, and he only lost 1 freaking match at Division I level. So, anyway, so I'm just going to say 2 and 3 right now. Number 3, I went with Dan Hodge, and number 2, I went with Yutaki. That's my top 10. So, and it's weird for somebody my age. I'm 37. I was born in 1979. For 2 people that I never actually saw with my own eyes wrestle, when I saw Kale win basically everything under the sun with my own eyes. The one thing, when I look up Hodge and Yutaki and looking at their records, undefeated in an era, 3 for 3, Hodge with the number of falls, and not just his lore because he was on Sports Illustrated, and, Jim Ross and Mike Chapman and everybody just loved Dan Hodge so much, but that he was like the first real dominant figure that I think our sport can point to, in that that people today still say Dan Hodge. I mean, our trophy is named after him. Although I thought about this. If they make all-time college football lists, is John Heisman on the list of the top athletes that played college football, even though the trophy's named after him?
Probably not.
Yeah. So Dan Hodge was my number 3, and Yojo Yutaki from Oklahoma State, and going undefeated in that, kind of in that era. And we said the Olympics was not a thing. Well, didn't pin everybody, but I understand this guy was just unstoppable. So just the research I did on him, had more wins in the kind of roughly the same era. I mean, Gray had almost double the amount of matches, but to go undefeated in that era at Oklahoma State, when wrestling was really starting to thrive. I mean, we're talking his last year was 1966. Hodge's last year was 57. So I think the era of the 60s with the wrestling kind of lifted him up above Hodge to me, just that much.
Yeah, Yutaki's a great choice, and I appreciate that choice because he was a marvelous wrestling talent, just one that you don't want to forget, and you want to keep his name in there because he won 2 Olympic gold medals, one in '64 and one in '68. So if you want to use the Olympics as a barometer, he was an Olympic gold medalist at the same time he was an NCAA champion. And so he was as untouchable as you can get as a collegiate wrestler. Even though sometimes the score might have been close, he was in control of the match the entire way.
All right, let's talk about some of the names that were on my chart that didn't make the cut. Ones that I was really fighting. I was almost looking for reasons to put these guys in, but I didn't really. I mean, I'm sure if you give me enough time, I can probably find reasons. Mike Caruso from Lehigh, 3-time champ, 57-1. His win percentage at 98.28%. Last year competed was in 1967. He was one that is like, yeah, I know about Caruso because I've got the Lehigh friendship with a lot of people there. Hugh Perry from Pitt, 1954 was his last year, 56-1, went 3 for 3. That's one. Ed Ruth on this list, 136-3, 3 titles and a third. David Taylor. Actually, he was the only other 2-timer on this list that I was considering, because he was a 4-time finalist on 134-3.
I'm surprised you wouldn't at least consider Wade Chalice on thinking about where you would put him on an honorable mention.
Let me just look. I actually did do some research on Wade just to verify things, because his pin level cannot be questioned. But
and he got ripped off.
He did get ripped off. Yeah, he did get ripped off. But you know, we're talking 153-5-1. Yeah, 106 falls. Very tough. I think yeah.
It's tough. Yeah,
that's the thing. Does Wade enter that conversation at number 10 again? I mean, it's like, getting ripped off his senior year, but he did have a tie his senior year, which actually I think somebody else did on this list too. As we said, yeah. So I mean, it wasn't completely undefeated throughout those last strings, but.
And I looked it up on Lee Camp. Pete Galley, it was that loss his junior year, and he was an unattached wrestler. So I don't know how you want to count that.
Whether he was he unattached and rolled or just unattached?
He was graduated. Okay. Galley was at that point.
So that's something we got to potentially look at. But anyway,
match was 6-1. So,
Wade was on. Yeah, Wade. If we look at Wade's 96% win percentage, that puts him above Kemp, Stieber, and Pat Smith on the list, but still it's below McElravy, who was sitting at number 9. So if you're looking at win percentages, total wins, it's impressive. But yeah, he did get kind of screwed out of his senior year. He did, yeah. He
went up a couple weight classes, and pinned Floyd Hitchcock, who was the NCAA tournament champion that year at 177. So he did some special things. So just wanted to at least throw his name out there because I think he deserves a mention.
Yeah, but we're looking at also a D&P as a freshman in 71. This is 4-year out. This is, that's another factor to throw in there. It's like, oh, well, he's in an era of, you could give him, he had 3 opportunities and only got, 2 titles. So, I mean, that's one of these things where we're nitpicking the greats of this sport.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
It's like, it's almost like I feel like,
is humbling.
It's like, are you kidding me? Like, I mean, I know people that would have Chalice like number 3 on their list, and justifiably so. Other names that I was sitting there trying to find ways. Ed Bannock, trying to get him in there. I think 9 losses was probably a little too much to overcome, including 3 as a senior. Tom Brands, Mark Shirella. I mean, he's a guy that was a 3-time champ, had losses every single year. So I mean, it's like as I go through doing research, it's like, man, so much. Dick Hutton, that's another one we mentioned earlier. Hasselrig. Well, Hasselrig his freshman year. Does not compete the Division I championship. So it's like so much stuff, man. So much stuff. Yeah. And I'm glad you're keeping me honest here.
Well, it's fun because you have to balance how you play favorites, which we all have a tendency to do. I don't think heavyweights necessarily deserve to be on the list, but Stephen Neal, someone that was my favorite wrestler as I was growing up, so I have sentiment toward him and think he deserves a mention, even if it's not in the top 10. I think he's the greatest super heavyweight of all time, regardless of record, just because of what he did and his domination. So we just have favorites, and that's why it's fun to argue.
Yeah, I'll be quite honest with you, people. I mean, Gray Simons is a personal favorite, but I think he's got the stats to back it up. I mean, it's not like I'm saying
he does. He deserves it. Yeah.
It's like he was a 7-time champion. No, I'm not claiming it because he's a 7-time champion. Right. Like Ben points out, is like, well, if I got to wrestle the NAIA, I'd be 4-time champion too. Sure, you would, but different era, different time. So as we said, that's what makes these lists like. I mean, the thing is, I could roll these again, do another show, and probably put them in different order.
You could, and it can change and ebb and flow through the course of your life because new people will come in. But I think it's a solid list. I think you did a lot of homework, and I like the Simons pick. I really do think he's deserving of that top 10 status because of what I've heard from other people, that he was really almost unstoppable on his feet and had just some great skills in that area, and made world teams too after college. So even though that's not part of the criteria, I think it's just good to explore that when you dig a little deeper on who some of these guys are.
Yeah, was a 2-time Olympian, so one thing to throw in.
Yeah.
Now, while we've got you on the horn, Kyle, what's coming down the pipe for the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum? You've had a busy summer. We had Honors Weekend, the renovation down in Stillwater for the big hall, and then we've had the golf tournament up in Iowa. We've had Pro Wrestling Weekend. We've got the Greco-Roman Hall of Champions coming up in October. What are some things people can look forward to from the Hall of Fame and the Dan Gable Museum specifically here in the next couple weeks?
We're working on a renovation, so the next couple weeks we're getting geared up for that Alan and Glory Rice Greco-Roman Hall of Champions, and then the hopes of raising the final money for our renovation that you saw down in Stillwater. So we want to get a bigger wrestling room. We want to get a bigger theater. We want better technology, and we really just want to get into that new era of what a student would like, which is kiosks. And so when you have the NCAA Champions Wall and you can have that on a kiosk, it saves a lot of time and energy. And I know that I visit WrestlingStats.com every day, and I think of Jay Hammond that you've mentioned a lot in this conversation every day when I pull open that website. That's one of the best legacies you could ever have in this sport. So that all being said, is we're pushing toward that, and we're trying to create an experience at the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum that is unique, and that you can train here, you can learn here, and you can come away with a better knowledge of what this sport's all about.
Kyle Klingman, he is the executive director down at the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum, 303 Jefferson in Waterloo. Right across from the Cedar Valley Sportsplex? Is that the name of that place?
Cedar Valley Sportsplex. Yep, you got it. And we're right down here. And as you talk about what we're doing on the horizon, USA Wrestling has a tournament coming up. Preseason Nationals will be in November, and then there's going to be 3 tournaments in December at the Dan Gable Museum. We're going to host some of the weigh-ins. They'll be here in Waterloo and Cedar Falls. So that's why we moved here from Newton, Iowa, was to have these great opportunities and to promote the sport in an area that really cares about it. And we've seen nothing but great things in our time here, and so we just want to keep raising the bar all the time. Yeah,
and I'm not 100% locked in on that, but I'm pretty sure I'd say about 90% going to be heading down there for preseason nationals. So,
good.
Little breaking news there.
We have Andy Hamilton from TrackWrestling.com working out of our facility now, so that's been a lot of fun to have him here and learn from him. And he's a fantastic journalist. And if you ever have a chance to read one of the best in the business, check out Andy in his new position at TrackWrestling.com.
Yeah, he's also he also likes to wear cool shirts from Mad Talk Online. I saw that. Yeah,
I love that shirt, and I love the what you did with that shirt as far as just the feel of it. It's not one of those heavy cottons. I think it's a 50-50 blend. So
it's a tri-blend. Yeah, it's a tri-blend.
Yeah. I'm impressed that you went that route. That's the only style of shirt that I would wear. So I was glad to see Andy repping that.
Yeah, I like that, and Cliff Fretwell and the boys down at Compound doing the thing there with the shirt. So.
Yeah.
So Kyle, I'd like to thank you for coming on again and being the yang to the yin as we come with this top 10. And you know what, folks? Ben and Tommy put it out on their show about feedback. I'm curious to hear your feedback too. So shoot me a note at Jason M. Bryant on Twitter. You can also throw notes at what is it? Yeah, at Wrestling Museum for Kyle.
Yep.
And get their feedback and say, yeah, you were right, or you should have pressed him more on this. I'm curious for your feedback. Or you can leave a voicemail by going to MattTalkOnline.com. There is a orange little tab on the left side. You can leave a voicemail there. You can even play it back through the show. So again, Kyle, thanks for hanging out with me and just being another voice on my top 10 list.
Hey, this was fun. I always enjoy coming on the show. You have a great product. And again, thanks for having on the Matt R show on the Matt Talk Online podcast network, and what an honor to be on there. And like I said, we had a visitor from New York come in and said he listens all the time, so I appreciate what you're doing for the sport.
All right, thanks, man. I appreciate you, Mr. Klingman.
Hey, thank you, Jason. We worked together for a year, and there were some tumultuous times, but some good times, and here we are together 7 years later talking wrestling.
Dude, that was 2008, 2009. So it was about 8 years ago this week we launched. We actually moved. It was about 8 years ago this week. Wow. Yeah, because our first show was November, but you moved in September. Yeah. I was here a couple weeks before that. I'm going to go see Joe Bush tomorrow night, so we're good to go.
All right. Well, good times, and we'll keep having more good times.
All right. This show was not interrupted by a golden retriever.
All right. Thanks.
And once again, thanks to Kyle Klingman of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum for really just kind of, I called him up out of the blue. I was like, look, I'm not going to sit here and talk for like 40 minutes to myself, to you, about my top 10 list. I want a guy I can trust, and Kyle's a guy. And I've already sent Ben Askren and Tommy Rollins an update that I totally copied their last episode in terms of type of content. But hey, you know what? I've got an opinion too on this, and I thought it would be fun to go back and look through some history. Like to thank our newest team member, our newest patron of the Matt Talk Podcast Network, Josh Broman, up in Canada. That's right. Our man from Ontario, Canuckistan, the Broman, helping us out and listening to the shows and really just, being a fan of north of the border. It's not just completely American Yankee type stuff down here. I mean, I live in a border state. I live in Minnesota. I actually am bordering Ontario, even though so is most of the Northeast. So I've actually been to Canada 3 times. Twice I entered into the province of Ontario. The first time was with the NWCA at the convention in 2006, and we were in Buffalo. I went through Niagara Falls, across the border into Canada. Yep. Okay, then the second time was through International Falls in Minnesota. That was in, my wife's family vacation. We were dating, so 2009. So a couple years between. 2009, I want to say. 9. Yeah, we were dating. Yeah, family vacation. Anyway, so I go through International Falls, Niagara Falls. One's in Minnesota, one's in New York. I'm in the same freaking province. Granted, I don't know. Anyway, then the third time was the Canadian Olympic trials back in December. I got to have Corey Jarvis on the show. Looking to have Erica Weeb on the show here in the coming weeks. The Canadian women's Olympic champion at 75 kilos. Erica's a great kid, so we'll look to have her on the show here. And it's not just because we were getting contributions from north of the border, but interesting way on how they do things up there. So like to thank Josh, like to thank all of our team members here on the Matt Talk Podcast Network. If you want to contribute to this network and keep the lights on, as we're kind of moving in a little bit of a different direction from a financial standpoint, because I don't know if you've noticed, but our good friends at Flips Wrestling they're doing a pivot with their company. They are no longer a title sponsor of this program. And there's no bad blood here. This is not something that there's no bad juju here. This is just something that their company, they're doing something a little different. And right now we're going to wait and see if they will eventually come back and sponsor this show. But as for right now, our friends at Compound Wrestling is the only corporate, so to speak, if you can call Cliff Fretwell corporate. He's corporate, man. Nathan Fernandez in the finals. I ain't corporate, man. No, Cliff and his team at Compound do an absolutely phenomenal job with their gear. Go to cmpteamwear.com. Get your team outfitted today. Or if you want to let them know where you're coming from, go to matttalkonline.com/teamwear. That'll be, that's a link that they can track to see exactly how many people. So if you use the matttalkonline.com/teamwear link, that will tell Cliff and his crew how many people are actually going to their site to order gear from this podcast and this network. So I'd like to thank them. But the reason I say that is, again, this is now a fan-supported show. So if you want to continue to see this program grow and get the great guests and do these type of things, go to matttalkonline.com/join the team, and that'll take you to a page where you can either donate once or you can become a team member, a patron, with a small donation each month that will basically go and help, again, keep the lights on when it comes to this program. You also get some cool stuff if you hit certain levels, like shirts, draft glasses, access to the Matt Talk Online almanacs that are provided for the NCAA championships and the USA Wrestling Junior Nationals. Although I don't know how much the USA Wrestling almanac is going to help my friend Josh Broman up in Ontario. But hey, you know what? He's going to get it anyway. So you like that stuff, if you like what you hear and you want to hear more of this type of stuff, get the great guests that you hear. Basically the I just have fun, man. I just have fun. And that's what the sport's about. I like having fun with this sport. I like having fun with you each and every week, once, twice, 3 times a lady. I don't know. I'm making stuff up right now. As you can tell, it's school's about to start. For a lot of people, my daughter's going to preschool 3 days a week next week. Baby number 2 is 2 months old, and a spit up machine. Let me tell you, this little child, Ruby, she is a machine when it comes to spit up. So, I'll tell you an interesting story, too, about the spit up. So, as an Old Dominion alum, there's not a whole lot of things that I like about George Mason University and Virginia Commonwealth University. Matter of fact, I never, ever refer to them as such. The only thing I like about George Mason is their wrestling program, the fact they have a wrestling team. Joe Russell, their former coach Tom Carr, who's now at Central Christian, of course, another former assistant, Izzy Silva out at Fresno State. So, George Mason wrestling, I have an affinity for, okay? And Tom Carr, before he left for Central Christian, gave me a George Mason wrestling shirt. Now, as an Old Dominion grad, this pained me to actually potentially wear. Because to wear anything George Mason is just like, it's like it's sacrilege. It's like a Virginia Tech fan wearing anything that says UVA. It's like an Ohio State fan wearing anything from that state up north. It's like, it's that type of thing. It's not quite on that scale, but let's just say that this Old Dominion University alum has really no love for Fairfax State Community College outside of its wrestling program. And we won't even get started on Violent Crime University up there in Richmond, or Virginia Convict, whichever one you call it. Anyway, so having fun. But so I wear the George Mason shirt yesterday to breakfast. And I sent a picture to Tom Carr, who's, again, now at Central State. I was like, proof, I actually wear it. Then I sent it to Joe Russell as well. I was like, see, I wear it. About an hour later, Ruby, again, my 2-month-old, just blasts it. Just blasts it. Who knows? You know what's in the bottle. So that's all over my shirt. And, as a father, I'm just like, oh, that's kind of interesting. So I take another picture and I send it to Tom. And I sent it to Joe Russell and be like, this is what my youngest daughter thinks of George Mason. So anyway, believe it or not, it was only the second time I'd ever worn the shirt, and the first time I'd ever worn it out in public. And then Ruby just destroys it. So I'm glad to see that my youngest daughter really does side with daddy on matters of college sports alliances. So that's all I got for you today. Newsletter's up. MadTalkOnline.com/news, free daily news. This show, become a patron, contribute if you like it. If you have not subscribed to this via iTunes, please do so at MadTalkOnline.com/getshorttime. You can go to MadTalkOnline.com/listen to figure out how many other different ways to listen to the show. So that's all I got for now. My name is Jason Bryant. Thank you for listening. And if you disagree with my list, give me something. We want some interaction here. Hit me on Twitter at Jason M. Bryant. Hit me on the voicemail. Hit me on the comment section at madtalkonline.com/contact. I don't care how you do it. Find me. Let's have a conversation. Woo. And thank you for spending your time with me, because you've always got time. Well, for short time. In case you're wondering, that was Dan Aykroyd impersonation from Caddyshack 2. Pretty crappy. Anyway.
Show is part of the Matt Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MattTalkOnline.com.